Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our participants, dignitaries, and our highly esteemed speaker, the Honorable Lordship, Mr. Justice S.C. Dharmadhikari, former Judge, Bombay High Court, to the online Q&A session on Supreme Court verdict, daughters having equal co-parcenary rights in a joint Hindu family, organized by the IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry in association with IMC Ladies Wing. All participants will be muted to avoid any disturbances during the course of this session. To consume less bandwidth and have clarity, you may like to stop video streaming at your end. Kindly post all your relevant queries in the chat section so that the same can be addressed during the Q&A session. To begin the session, may I request Mr. Rajiv Poddar, President, IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to present the welcome address. Over to you, Mr. Poddar.
Thanks. Thanks, LB. Honorable Dharmadhikari ji, Anuja Mittal ji, Anand Desai ji, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon and welcome to our session on the Supreme Court's verdict, daughters having equal rights in a joint Hindu family. The Supreme Court verdict on equal rights is immensely welcome. This significant judgment aims at ensuring right of equality of a daughter in the Hindu undivided family. The Supreme Court has held that women will have equal rights to family property by birth, irrespective of whether her father was alive or not, as on 9th September 2005, that is the day when Parliament recognized this right by amending the Hindu Succession Act of 1956. Through this ruling, the Supreme Court has now categorically ruled that the daughter's right flows from their birth and not by other factors such as existence of their fathers. Though this judgment envisages to rectify one of the discriminatory social practices, we remain skeptical about its implementation and actual benefits to women. A major overhaul of social attitudes and simplification of litigation process will be called for. In this context, and to enable us all to seek more clarity on the verdict, today's session has been organized by the IMC Law Committee together with the Ladies Wing of IMC. As the President of IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I would like to extend a special and warm welcome to our Speaker of the Day, the Honorable Lordship, Mr. Justice S.C. Dharmadhikari, who would address our participants and comprehend on the judgment. A few words about IMC. The IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry is an apex chamber of commerce, trade and industry in the Western region, and its membership base of over 5,000 members and over 150 trade associations affiliated to it. Together, it represents and advocates interest of over 4 lakh businesses and industry establishments across the country from diverse sectors of industry. Without taking much of your precious time, I would like to request Mr. Anand Desai, Chairman of IMC Law Committee, to take over from here and moderate this interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's indeed an honor to have an eminent speaker in Justice Dharmadhikari sharing his views and interpretation of what is clearly a very, very important and landmark judgment. Justice Dharmadhikari has had an excellent career as a counsel and then as a judge of the High Court. And we really look forward, sir, to hearing you and your views on this. If I can get into the first point as a bit of background, can we very briefly touch upon how ancestral property and an HUF were conceptually viewed prior to the 2005 amendment?
First of all, my sincere thanks to the Indian Merchant Chamber, the Indian Merchant Chamber's Law Committee, my friend Anand Desai, the president of the Indian Merchant Chamber, and the ladies' wing. Indeed, it is an honor to address such a gathering. What I feel is that when there is an ancestor and a common one through whom the property is claimed by several members, it is normally known as an ancestral property, that which comes from an ancestor. The joint Hindu family is a concept where the family is joined in estate, in food and worship. The joint Hindu family was essentially dominated by men, for the simple reason that when the ancestor left some property behind or an estate behind, its management and its administration was an exclusive affair. It was reserved, a right reserved to the males. They were known as co-parsonaries because they had an undivided interest until the family properties, which are ancestral properties and a blend of ancestral and self-acquired, they were partitioned. There was no such thing as separate shares, but we are concerned here with the ancestral property. The joint and undivided family continues, but now what happens is the members who are co-parsoners are no longer the men alone. Till the amendment came, and the amendment is not a new feature. We in Maharashtra should know that the Maharashtra government had already taken a very progressive step in 1994 itself by amending the Hindu Succession Act. The subject being a common subject and reserved for both the parliament and the state legislative assemblies, the amendments were introduced by some of the southern states and Maharashtra. The government of India, realizing that there is a gender discrimination and it is the men who are dominating the show, on most occasions the females do not have any right to enter the co-parsonary or as a co-parsonary or as a sharer together with the men. This amendment has been brought. The purpose and object of this amendment is to remove a gender discrimination. The discrimination was solely on gender basis. It was a complete antithesis or a contrast to the right of equality guaranteed by our constitution. All the more Article 14 and 15 of the constitution, which permits the government and the parliament permits to make a law so as to promote the welfare and interests of women. Such a step was long pending, that it was taken in 2005, but that it met with spate of litigation. And today till 2020, the legal position was uncertain, is unfortunate, but a peculiar situation. It is so very special to India that nothing reaches the court and gets partially resolved. Even now, from the questions that have been sent to me, it appears that it is not fully resolved. We have a conflict in the mind more than in the law. Law is very clear. The contradictions and the complications are in our living. That is why we feel the difficulties. If there is an obstacle, it is only in the mind, and the mindset has to change. If I come to your next question, it is very commonly confused between how you inherit property and how you succeed. What happens is there are properties which are acquired either through the ancestor, or there are properties which are built and which are known as self-acquired properties because of one's own efforts, one's own earnings. And that is how we in an undivided Hindu family have both something by which we have been benefited from the efforts of the ancestor, something by which our efforts have rewarded us. Now the conflict started because the ancestral properties were not as kartas held by anybody other than men. Only the male members of the family were known as co-parceners. This was a position prevailing right up to the 2005 amendment. And in fact, the clarification came only with this judgment in Vinita Sharma. Now, the question that whether HUF survives this amendment or not is very crucial. We still have undivided families. We can remain united, joint, and undivided. What happens now is, if we have the ancestral properties, we will have a sharer in the form of women. The women members of the family, particularly the daughters, will now have to be introduced, and they will have equal status with that of men. That is how the 2005 amendment should be seen, and it is very simple. It doesn't have any complications. It only seeks to amend Section 6 of the Hindu Succession Act 1956. We are all aware that in Hindu law, we have two schools. We have the Mitakshara school, and which is the school applicable to this part of India, the Daya Bhaga school. The only distinguishing feature, and very simple, is as far as Mitakshara school is concerned, the concept is of unity of ownership and possession, where in Daya Bhaga school, it is the unity of possession. Now, what happens is, ownership being a feature, the whole conflict started. Until the law was codified first in 1956, you should have, and all of you are familiar with the conflict which was there in the mind of the then President of India, the esteemed Rajendra Prasad ji, and the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. He was of the view that we must codify the Hindu law regarding succession, marriage, etc. And that is how we had a codified law. From 1956 till now, the domination that was there of the men continued, and it was never thought that the property would be equally safe in the hands of women. There are also practical and pragmatic difficulties, in the sense that there were few families where there was no male ancestor, no male co-partner. All these properties then had to decay virtually in the absence of somebody to look after. Now the karta can be a daughter also. Even otherwise, in our day-to-day life, we have given them that status and position. It was only that the law required that change, and that has come into effect in 2005. So HUF is not a thing totally lost, only that when you have a blend of ancestral and the self-acquired properties, your succession will continue. But as far as the rights are concerned now, the position is that men and women are brought on par, with the daughter entering as a co-partner.
Can I just get a couple of clarifications?
Yes.
One is, as you rightly said, self-acquired property may be treated and dealt with as self-acquired property, in which case succession goes as per the Succession Act. That's applicable, Indian Succession Act or Hindu Succession Act, as the case may be. If, however, the family member decides to put that self-acquired property into the common pot or the HUF, it will then fall under the category which you are describing currently. Just to get that clarified, that's one. The second thing is all ancestral property considered to be covered by this judgment, or is there a distinction between ancestral and HUF property? Because this is again a common misconception people have, that HUF you have to have a income tax permanent account number, etc. So how does that play out?
There, Anand, I think that concept of HUF has survived only because of the income tax. We want to structure everything so as to suit the tax law. It's not, but it is inbuilt that we don't want to avoid a tax law, but we want to plan our affairs in such a way that we minimize the tax burden. For that, we invent so many things. We know that the family has, without any partition, actually effected a partition, but it remains there as an undivided family, Hindu undivided family. Therefore, what we say this is a property belonging to the HUF. There has been no partition, no demarcation, no identification as far as individual shares are concerned. And that is why when we say that these properties belong to us and we are united, we want to minimize the tax burden on the sharers. But in effect, you must have seen, if properties are spread all over India, it is very difficult unless you continue in this fashion and you have accounting difficulties. You will not be able to go and tell a tax man that don't tax me. Sometimes there could be a burden twice over. So it is now that the HUF will be there. It is not completely wiped out. Hindu undivided families will be there. It is not there only for tax purposes, they will be there. But what happens is, when somebody wants a partition, now the partition was inevitable when a demand was made by one of the co-partners. Then you had his share to be demarcated, you had a partition by metes and bounds. Thereafter, the undivided part goes. We stay as a Hindu family, but we have a people combination of our members who will have their properties clearly identified as belonging to them. It is then their family which will become the Hindu undivided family. That is how we have viewed this.
So
For our purposes, any further details would only confuse the issue for all of you. For both of us, it can be a very good debate.
So would it be fair to say that what is described as ancestral property for the purpose of the Act is no different to what we generally term as HUF property?
Yeah.
They're interchangeable terms.
Yeah.
Now, if you take the situation prior to the 2005 Act amendment to the Hindu Succession Act, as has now been interpreted by the Honorable Supreme Court in this judgment, can we just play out the various scenarios of a situation that could have happened between 2005 and 2020? For example, prior to 2005, as you said, there was no right for a daughter to be a co-partner. That right came into existence in 2005. If a HUF did exist and it was partitioned in 2006, for example, or 2007, how would the law have applied?
There has to be a partition, actual partition. What has happened, and the tendency appears to be to defeat this law. The purpose and object is to see that there is a bypassing of the law. People were putting up all sorts of defenses. There has been an oral partition. We have been always living separately. After the marriage, daughters have had no connection with the family. The children also have now gone abroad. Some of them are out, some of them are in India, but yet all of them are not staying in one house or not occupying one residential property, nor are carrying on the same business or same profession. However, what has happened is that irrespective of all this, the moment you have a property which is an ancestral property, you cannot have only the male members managing and administering it. Now, if there is a partition demanded, as it is, there used to be this scenario where partition was demanded. It was not easy. It always ended up somewhere or the other in litigation, some sort of litigation, or then there used to be an arrangement made. Either there was an amicable settlement, family arrangements, partitions made during the lifetime, or after the death of somebody, there used to be necessarily a partition and required and necessitated. All this happened initially because the HUF, or what you call is the ancestral properties, were managed only by the male members. With the law now, when you recognize the right of the daughters, this sort of argument started that you are reopening everything. Now you are upsetting everything. Now within our family there will be disputes. the law has taken care of this. Law has said that anything prior to 20th December 2004. The problem with us is when the law like this is enacted, we don't want to read it. We want somebody else to read it for us, to explain it.
Sorry to interrupt again, but just to be clear, so any partition that has happened prior to 20th December 2004 is not affected by this amendment?
Yes, yes. And if you see carefully, the word partition has been used at two places. Subsection 1 uses the word partition in relation to disposition also. So what I say, it will not affect or invalidate any disposition or alienation, including any partition. So what happens is disposition could be by will. So that disposition remains unaffected. Alienation means you alienate the property. That is also unaffected. Partition means a partition actually made will also remain unaffected provided it is before 20th December 2004.
So from midnight.
And this word appears in the explanation also, which is an explanation, though below subsection 5 of section 6, it is applicable for the entire section.
Correct. So therefore, from midnight of December 20th, 2004, from the next moment onwards, any partition that takes place will also result in a right to the female members, whether daughter or daughter's daughter. Is that right?
Provided that has not been effected by a decree of the court or by a deed of partition duly registered under the Registration Act. In that case, you will also have to show that you have acted upon it. You can't just plead partition and say it is before 20th December 2004 and get away from the law. You see, in the judgment, so many eventualities have been dealt with. There were cases pending in the court on the day when this law came. The ingenuity was that now that we have already filed a suit, there is a partition. The partition will only take place from the date of filing of the suit by a formal decree. The court said, sorry, the word used is final decree. That is the final decree of a court, not yours. Your filing of a suit is not a decree. That's a decree maybe between you. That's an arrangement at best. It has to get the imprimatur or seal of the court. If that gets it, then only you will have a saving from this amendment. Else, everything pending on that day, the law intervenes and the child, that is a woman, gets the right. The girl child gets the right.
Now, on a practical basis, let's assume that between 2005 or 2004, 21st December onwards, the right has accrued. A partition has happened in 2006 or 7. Under whatever understanding, the property has been divided, thinking it only still goes to male members, for example, or it has not been equally divided. Today, after this judgment has come, the awareness level may be higher than it has been for some time. What can the girl, child, or her heirs do now? Because their property may be dissipated, spent, may have appreciated, may have depreciated. So what does one do today after so many years on a practical basis?
If at all there is an assertion from the female co-partner, you will at best plead in defense a partition. By itself, partition doesn't wipe out her right. What is, you see, the anxiety of the legislature is not to undo something which has been done conclusively, but proved to be conclusive. Merely setting up a defense is not going to work for you. We males are now a little vulnerable. We are now doing everything to see that the law doesn't intervene or it does not apply. So what we do is we plead oral partition. We bring about something. The Supreme Court judgment doesn't foreclose everything like this. The Supreme Court judgment also says in pragmatic terms, that you can't just say oral partition. You can't say defense, raise a defense and defeat the law. You will have to prove that there was in fact partition. And partition can be proved by public documents. Say, for example, you comply with the tax regime, you will be able to rely on the tax documents. If you rely upon the property documents, you will have to show that there are entries which show that the partition has been effected. There are other documents and contemporaneous record which will enable people to establish and prove that there has been a partition. Despite 20th December 2004 being entered as a date, thereafter as well, if you are able to show that there is a registered instrument, but taking effect, in fact taking effect, and there is a partition because of a decree of the court, the law will not apply. The Supreme Court has left that little way for people to show that things have now reached a stage where it will not be possible to reopen without disturbing everything and confer some right on this female co-parcel. But that is a battle which every person who sets up a defense will have to fight on his own. Otherwise, this 20th December 2004 is a date which you must keep in mind.
So again, take a situation where the daughter prior to 2004, 20 December had passed away, leaving children. Partition takes place after 20 December 2004 by the method of registered deed, etc. But that girl child's heirs are not included. Am I right in saying they would also have a right to come and say, I have a right since my mother was by birth entitled to the right. She may have passed away before December 20, 2004, but that right devolves on me as a child.
Apart from you all friends, I want to tell you something. That what will happen in such cases is that the law will always be there, and it is there, as clear as daylight. However, if something like this were to be set up as a defense and a request was made, now don't undo this, you will have to show that there has been this 20th date, December 2004, the partition, or there was a disposition, as I showed you the earlier thing, alienation. The tendency will be to show that the property was alienated, is no longer now available. The tendency will also be to show that there is already a will and the will has been acted upon. The tendency will also be there to show that there is a partition. So if somebody thinks that by only partition I can get out of this law, it's not correct. It's not accurate. You can show a disposition also. It's not that difficult. But when it comes to partition, you will have to show that it has been acted upon. Because there is on paper something, there is some arrangement carved out, but there is no acting upon it. How would you be able to prevent this? The heirs of that child, the female child, who would have been a co-partner, as on 9/9/2005, she could have asserted her right as well. And therefore, what these heirs can successfully establish is that we have a right in the property. It is for those setting up a plea in defense as partition, that there is a partition, who will have an uphill task. That is why the struggle was, and partially people were successful. In one could persuade judges all over India and the Supreme Court as well, from 2005 to 2020, in a bench of two or two, that somebody has to be alive. That daughter had already been. She has to be alive. That's true. She has to be alive to claim it. But not that her father has to be alive. The earlier judgment said her father also has to be alive and she also has to be alive on 9/9/2005. That is no longer the law now. The father may not be there, but she becomes a co-partner by birth. So her birth gives her that right. Co-partnership is created by birth. Co-partner is created by birth. Succession is something you get, you succeed to after somebody's death. But this is by birth. Therefore, they are bound to say that the moment our mother was born, she had this right. And we could have enforced it, and we are enforcing it from 9/9/2005. The enforcement starts. So as on 9/9/2005, something that had not dissipated, nothing, but you will have to give a value equivalent in money or something to them. Else, you set up this defense and prove it to the hilt that there was indeed a partition fully acted upon. Nothing remains now to be given to her.
So, one aspect which, as a practitioner, at least I have found, in Hindu families, very often property is held for convenience in the names of different members, historically mainly male members. And again, the logic could have been wealth tax, it could have been other reasons of
Yes.
that.
Prudent management also.
Prudent management. Now, in that situation, although a deed of partition has been executed, maybe not registered, now acting upon it logically would mean changing the name on the title deed. That's the way we normally act upon a document, which, as you know, attracts stamp duty, it could attract a tax, etc. So people have not done it. But a document in itself, why would it not work in these situations? Because of extraneous reasons, it has not been acted upon by an actual registration of the new name.
The answer is not very easy to give, but not very difficult either. Suppose you take an instance. Now we have a modern day living, urban living, essential urban living. You are no longer having your bungalows, but you are having some of the properties are there in the form of bungalows, but you have flats. Now, when you are a member of a cooperative housing society, your share certificate. Suppose if you have made a request to the society already, and the society took time in making a transfer, but somebody went and occupied it already, pursuant to that arrangement which was carved out. You may be able to establish and show that a ministerial act was not performed by somebody, by a third party over whom I had no control. You could set up this. How far it will succeed will be a case-to-case basis analysis. It can't be that there is a standard answer to it. You can't clinch it by saying you prove this, you prove this, you prove it. But there could be several documents. Like you can show that you are paying assessment tax for the property. You could show every other things which are making a modern day living. See, what happens is, plea of partition has to be based on oral evidence, as the Supreme Court says. Bring evidence of it. Don't say this, that there is a partition. That will not protect you, or that will not take you out of this. You will have to prove it, which are very exceptional cases. See, there can be no property enjoyed today unless you inform public bodies and public officials.
So whether it's your passport, your visa, your income tax, PAN number, all those are indications as to where you live in one part. But some of them may also be indications of ownership.
Yes.
Now, another significant change which seems to have come is that earlier, when a Hindu died, his share devolved upon the other co-partners.
Yes.
Now, under the amendment, it devolves by testamentary or interstate succession, which means it goes to his branch or her branch.
Yes.
Is this sounding the death knell in future of ancestral property as we knew it, because it no longer devolves upon the surviving co-partners, it devolves upon the branch of the deceased co-partner? So how is this going to play out?
So there will have to be a partition then. Somebody will have to be given an identifiable share. What used to happen in the domination and the dominated structure was, all properties are safe in our hands. Why are you worried? What is your demand? We don't know what for your demands are. You are a son, and so long as I am alive, we are all members of a joint family. We are protecting your interests. What is that you want? and no demand or no, you see, voice was taken note of in the pious hope that we must be together. You see, there was also a pious obligation which had to be discharged. See the progression of the law now. It has brought about a change that you can't have this property of these families, put in litigation or put in issue on the plea that, on the basis that there was a pious obligation of the karta or somebody or an elder member, male member, which had to be discharged by the son. Now this would be used to defeat the law. Therefore, this also goes now. So alienation for that purposes and all goes. In the similar fashion, we will have to accept it, that the sharing will have to be now a broader. You will not be able to say that my brother who passed away long time back, his daughter who is married and happily staying somewhere else, will now take away a chunk and she will enjoy with her family there. She's no longer part of our family, but yet she gets the right to enjoy. Now this is something which is a problem with our mindset. Initially also, Anand, you must have noticed several people loosely used to argue that she's married and gone. Now she's no longer our family member. That was a very loose, concept. You can't now defeat this by marriage. You can't defeat only by death. If she is alive on this day, then you could enforce it.
No, I understand, but when it says it will devolve by testamentary succession, or
as if it is her property on partition.
Correct. So this will trigger a partition, or this can still stay?
Yes.
It will trigger a partition.
This will.
So therefore, I'm saying that does this mean that over time ancestral property as a concept will go? Because when the current generation passes away, it will all go to the respective branches, and that's the end of ancestral property. Is that the intent?
Somebody will be the ancestor still. Their ancestor will be there. You can't have you can't have a scenario or a situation without an ancestor. We all have an ancestor. See, what happens is the parting is always difficult. Parting is painful because we think it belongs to us. It was his toil, it was his sweat which brought everything, including the wealth. We may have added to it, but that mindset is still there all over. That if we have to share it with larger number of family members, the lesser will come to us now. Our enjoyment will, go down. All this may in that sense bring about a division. But you can be united even in division. The house will be known as a house of somebody. But maybe they are residing separately. They will recognize the effort of that person who has brought all this glory to them. Someday we'll have to accept this scenario, because our children are not going to say that everything you will take away in your lifetime, leave nothing for us. They would require definitely something for them.
Correct. In terms of Limitation Act, an action for claiming a share by the girl child or the grandchild, amendment has come into force in 2005. There are some views that the real clarity has come now after this judgment. But the fact that limitation normally is 3 years in India for a suit to recover property, how will that be viewed by a court if a suit is filed now for a partition that took place more than 3 years ago?
See, earlier, 2 judges gave 2 different views. They said that both of them, the person who is a male member, male co-partner, he should be alive and his daughter should be alive. Only then the amendment will apply. Now they say it is by birth. There is no longer that necessity in law that you have to be living. So living, daughter must be living. But that person whose property she will get as a co-partner property, he need not be alive. However, the explanation has come in the judgment of the Supreme Court also, and by normal interpretative process, that the enforcement is from 2005, 9/9/2005. So you can't say that I have a right before 2005, 9/9/2005. Your enforcement will be 9/9/2005. But in cases to cases, you'll find from facts and circumstances appearing in each case as to how vigilant you are. If you have to say 3 years, then the 3 years is when the succession, when that right accrues to you, rather when that right will accrue. When will that accrue to each person? That would be the starting point. You can't say that because within 3 years from 2005, nothing has been done, the right is gone.
Okay, now there are some
It will have to be viewed from family to family,
factual
the
background.
circumstances.
Okay. There's some questions from the friends who are listening. In fact, quite a
Yes.
few questions. Some I think we've answered, but let me try and pick up those we've not. So one question is where a male member has passed away, and what we read just now about his branch getting his entire share is not fully understood. So under an MOU, the brothers effectively tell the sister or daughter, this is your share, now go. And she signs it.
Yes.
Is that something that's binding, or can she wake up a little later and say, sorry, I did not understand the implications of my signing it and I still want my right?
By its very name, what is MOU? It's a memorandum of understanding. Beyond that, my understanding could be anything at one time. My understanding could change. It remains only a piece of paper. It has to fructify into something. It has not fructified. It has only remained an agreement or an understanding between parties, but was not acted upon. Again, the question will come, where have you acted upon it? So division has to be shown to exist, and
Right.
that must be an identifiable concept. On paper, it can be, everybody will prepare papers and backdate them.
Another question.
MOUs are not going to take the case any further.
Right. Another
They
question.
can be reopened and there will be a chaotic situation.
Another question is that if, as we discussed earlier, and as the amendment says, or the act itself and concept of Hindu law says, that the right of a child is by birth, what happens to an adopted child? An adopted daughter, for example.
Very clear again, son or daughter, whether adopted or not. So long as she's a daughter and known as such in law, whether she was born in the family or adopted will not make any difference.
So she's deemed to be born into the family.
She's a daughter. Now what happens in each of these cases is, as a professional, we must be able to tell people that if they want to litigate, they must know that they will be opening up everything, not only for themselves, which will be bitterness and everything else, but for the progeny also. Whether it is better to end everything by recognizing everybody's rights and then giving them out so that the progeny lives happily, or it is that we want to carry on the litigation simply because we do not like or appreciate the law.
Another question is that upon a daughter getting a right, if she has passed away or passed away later, let's assume she's passed away later, it'll be governed by her law, so I'm not going into that. But if she has passed away, will only her children be entitled to her share, or will her husband, if he survives her, also be entitled to part of that share?
Rule of succession will intervene as per the Hindu Succession Act. Then whosoever are the male members who succeed to a female's estate, they will all be there. Whether they will be in the same class or not is a different thing. You must have seen the schedule to the Hindu Succession Act. People must read that. There is a class 1 heir, there class 2 heir. Heir, the status as a heir will no longer be, affected by all this. Heirs, but there will be plural, no? Everybody will be there. So if she dies without leaving a will, it has to go by the rule of succession in the Hindu Succession Act, which applies to intestate succession, meaning thereby somebody dies without leaving a testament or a will.
Okay, there are a couple of questions. The reason I'm not raising them is technically they fall outside the scope of this discussion. But one question is that if a will is forged, what happens? So I I'm not sure if you want to answer that because it's not really the topic. And this really falls outside the amendment to the
So
Hindu.
what applies to partition can apply also to will, because if the will, anything that is a product of fraud will have to give way, and the law will then be applicable with its full rigor.
Another question is that, as we know, in some parts of India at least, a child of a tenant living with the tenant at the time of death of the tenant continues to be entitled to remain in the property and become a tenant. Now, in this situation of where it's an ancestral property or perceived ancestral property, the tenancy, and the tenant dies, but only one child is living with the tenant at that time, will the other children also have a right?
That was the provision also in the exclusive enactments like the rent control legislation. Others could go to the court and establish their right. In that event, they will become tenants. But this is for the purposes of the landlord looking to somebody for the maintenance of his property. He must recover his rent. He must recover whatever the permitted increases and taxes are. So whosoever resides with him at the time of his death was for purposes which were really pragmatic and practical, identified as a tenant that did not disturb anything which came by virtue of a law, the law applicable to intestate succession or under a will. All that has to take effect. It was not impacted by such arrangements. It was purely for the purposes of the rent control legislation to enable recovery of rent and taxes.
So title continues to all the heirs.
Yes, yes, yes.
One more question is, if a girl is a minor, I guess same thing applies to a boy being a minor, but if a girl is a minor at the time of the partition, who will be looking after her interest in the partition property, her share?
The male co-parsoner who is there will no longer be able to say after this amendment that I am not protecting her interest also. So he will in effect manage it for the co-parsoners. All co-parsoners will be there. There is undivided, there is no identified segregated share. So the property will be held by him, and the defeat of the law is not possible by saying this. The only thing is she should be alive. If she is not alive, then the question doesn't arise. The Supreme Court also says so.
No,
as on 9/9/2005, she should be alive.
Correct. The minor child is alive. The minor child continues to be a minor when the partition happens.
And therefore the right is not defected only because she's a minor. It will have to be held, so to be said, very in loose terms, in trust. It will be a trust for her. In trust, you have to hold it for her.
Going back for a moment, because I think some questions are framed a bit differently. I think that's a question being asked. But so we read a bit, we discussed a bit earlier, that the right of a co-parsoner or the interest of a co-parsoner will devolve after the amendment by testamentary or interstate succession. Therefore, if the co-parsoner decides to give the entire share of his or hers to one child to the exclusion of the other children, that will be upheld.
Yes.
Now, in that situation,
there has to be then a testamentary disposition, but then.
Correct. But if in fact the girl children have already got a right in the property, ancestral property by birth, how do those things reconcile the two situations? One is the adult who passed away said, by testamentary succession, my share goes to only one child, but already by birth, the children have a right.
See, that as we have seen, you may be member of the family, but so long as your father is or mother is alive, you don't get it. You get it only when some event takes place. So in the lifetime of yours, your father could either effect a partition, a family arrangement, or he could leave a will, and he would say that. Likewise, the male and now the female co-parsoner can leave a will and say that my property, which comes to me because of this amendment, post this enforcement of this law, must now go to the named person in my will as per my wish. It need not go to other children also. It need not be you see, divided between them equally. It could go exclusively to one. It is entirely the volition of that person. And that is what possibly hurts everybody. That is what is hurting also. Because the moment she has entered as a co-partner, she may not leave anything for the son if the son is otherwise well provided for. And in the will, she may say that my daughter should take everything. Now, if you have to, the will is not tainted by anything, then the will has to be given effect to.
But again, just for my,
same way, suppose Anand, just for example, if the property is sold, then what, you will chase it in whose hands?
True.
She may as well sell it, no?
Yeah, but again, just for my understanding, so if there is a child with 2 children, a second child with 2 children, all of these 1 plus 2 and 1 plus 2 get a share by virtue of birth in the family as a starting point. However, each has a share. What we are now discussing is a share of the parent, which in itself will go as per. I just want to be clear on that. So it's not as though the child loses the right through birth.
No.
This is only the right of the parent to that extent, which is going by testamentary or interstate succession. Yeah, just to be clear.
And the child will look as somebody, as an ancestor, and then become a co-partner.
I think we have answered.
So in that way, it is a very progressive legislation. You see, as far as your ancestor goes, you will become a co-partner. No?
Correct. There is one
of
more.
That identified share of the partition with the male members. So many things have happened now. Dwelling house, otherwise, unless the male members decide to divide it, nothing was available in the dwelling house. Now, Section 23 is repealed with effect from 9/9/2005. So, in the dwelling house as well. So, this apprehension essentially comes, what happens, the flat stands in the name of the mother. Now, mother is a co-partner. I will be also co-partner along with my brothers and sisters. So, the girl child or the male child of such a co-partner, female co-partner, need not have apprehension. The share will be there, the right will be there. Of course, if it is not disposed of already, then it will go by the rule of succession.
Right.
In the Hindu Succession Act, that is applied.
One more question is, if a uniform civil code is brought into force, what happens to this law and this amendment?
Uniform civil code is not going to be Hindu code. Are Hindus prepared to sacrifice so many and surrender so many other rights? First of all, we must start with the majority when we say uniform civil code. The best from everything has to come there. In Goa, the Portuguese civil code was applicable. The Portuguese code gave equal right to the wife on marriage. Every property was taken to be a property belonging to both. It was in that sense a very, very progressive legislation. We did not take it. We did not accept it amongst Hindus also. So what happens is, it is eventually not going to be a uniform. Are we going to sacrifice and surrender our personal laws to such an extent that their survival will become impossible if we have a uniform civil code?
Okay, one more question. Well, the questions keep coming, but I think we need to wrap up with this one because we're running out of time. Sorry, I lost it, went up. Yeah, so the question is that upon marriage, a right does not arise to the spouse under this law. As an intestacy, of course, whatever happens, happens. Under a will, whatever happens, happens. But in itself, actually, maybe you can answer on that basis, because I think the answer is self-evident. That given the fact that the co-partner's share goes now under a will or as an intestacy, it will go to the spouse as well to the extent of the share.
Even otherwise, it was going earlier also. Widow was not excluded from the scheme of the law. Co-partner was, the question was only the son. As a son, you see, the son is taken, as the Supreme Court says, He is a son until he weds. The daughter is a daughter till she is dead. So the daughter has been now given this equal status with the son. But widow was in any event there. So person is a co-partner. His property upon his death could have devolved if the widow had also demanded the share of the co-partner. She had a right in that. She could have demanded. Her position was intact, even today remains intact. She can succeed. Succession is not, you see, affected here. The rule of succession is there in the law for all Hindus, whether amendment is there or not there. Now it is only the ancestral property what is hurting everybody seems to, and that is the questioning. That now in the ancestral property everybody gets, and our married children also will get, married daughters will also get, married sister will also get. Now that is something which should not be.
Yeah. Can a share be surrendered voluntarily?
What is that recognized in law? How is that recognized in law as you surrender? A deed of surrender?
That
Which
question
in
is,
fact which must be on par with partition. See, you partition something, but you surrender. On partition also, what share you will get, you can surrender. There is no difficulty. A voluntary act can always be there. And that is what one hopes. That is how the wiser counsel prevails. In most families, it has prevailed. The married daughters, after having 20, 30 years of marriage, they have gone and said, even now, there are instances after this 2005 law. The married daughters have said now 10, 15 years have gone by. We don't want anything. Let the brothers keep.
I think this was really very, very useful and extremely, I think, knowledgeable comments by you. Thank you so much. There's a request which I'm going to pass on before I hand over to our ladies wing, which is that a lot of people are asking whether this can be put on YouTube so that more people can benefit from your wisdom.
There's hardly any wisdom. They can there is no property right here. So it can be shared. However, I am not so comfortable with this, because if we had been in person, we would have been able to answer so many queries, because queries are there even on the face. Queries need not be put, and questions are there, and they are going to be more. What I can see from here is that there will be endless dispute, there will be endless battle, there will be litigation. All these apprehensions are there. But these apprehensions apart, is the mindset there now to welcome such a legislation? Because we are also fathers of daughters. We are also fathers of sons. We are also members of some families which have been deprived. We have seen the fate and plight of our sisters and mothers. Now is the time to say that we will have no discrimination, at least on gender. Maybe not every sister or not mother or any female member who joins as co-partner will be so giving, maybe asserting type. But then it's time we recognize and accept that there is a right, that there is a share, and amicably settle it for whatever it is. Not by just parting with some properties. If that requires, that can be done and that should be done. But if it requires payment of money, payment of other benefits, sharing of them with her family, then it should be welcome.
Thank you so much.
Else we will have no harmony and peace in any family. Then harmony comes at a price worth paying it.
Correct. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Mittal. This was, by the way, their request, not the law committee's suggestion. Our president asked me that is a very relevant topic for the ladies' wing. And I think the way you spoke and explained it was clearly something that they would find music to their ears. So thank you. Ms. Mittal, I would hand over to you.
Thank you. As we come to the end of this interesting and knowledgeable session, may I request Mrs. Anuja Mittal, President, IMC Ladies Wing, to present the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mrs. Mittal.
It is my proud privilege to pose a vote of thanks today. On behalf of the Ladies Wing, I would like to express our deep gratitude to Honorable Justice S.C. Dharmadhikari for his absolutely erudite, enlightening, and thoughtful address. Thank you for sparing your valuable time to be amidst us. A round of applause for Mr. Anand Desai for conceptualizing and moderating the session so judiciously with his immense expertise and vast knowledge. We are very grateful to IMC President Mr. Rajiv Pudar for associating with the IMC Ladies Wing for this insightful session. We look forward to working in unison for many events in the future. We really appreciate the IMC and the Ladies Wing Secretariat for their sincere efforts in putting together this event. The success of the event is equally attributed to the solidarity and patronage of all of those present here today. Thank you to our members and guests for attending this event. In conclusion, I would like to say that though this landmark judgment envisages rectifying one of the discriminatory social practices, it would require no less than a behavioral change in the mindset of the Indian society to fulfill the goal of gender parity. Thus, there is a need to bring a change in the patriarchal mindset of the society and to ensure that women have access to the same opportunities as men. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dharmadhikari. Lordship, thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.